the infamous quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a with the assumption that ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to y. Okay? So when would we use this formula? Well, honestly, you could use this formula for any of these problems that we've learned. You could use it for this one, this one. You can use it for all of them. But then the issue becomes, do you know how to use it effectively? And is it really worth all the effort? Okay? So since I'm asking you to solve by the quadratic formula, I want you to do that. First thing I want you to identify is A, B, and C. Okay? Now, everybody does this a little bit differently the way they approach it, but this is the way I approach it. Negative of negative 5 plus or minus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. Now, I don't know about you, but the most difficult part for me, or the most messy part for me, handwriting included, is this part. So I'm always going to approach that part first. I can take care of the other stuff later. I don't want to rewrite it all. I just want to take care of what's in the radical. So anytime I square a negative, it always turns positive. Make this a little bit bigger. That is a lot better. And when I'm seeing this, you just multiply all of them. Don't even look at the negative, just multiply. 4 times 3, 12 times 2, 24, 1 negative, negative. Now, square root of 25 minus 24 is 1. The square root of 1 is 1. So all that just gave me the 1. Now I'm going to come back here because now it's a lot easier. Negative of negative 5 is positive 5. Plus or minus, all that was 1, over 6. Sorry, you can't see that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to split it. 5 plus 1 over 6, 5 minus 1 over 6. I don't need you to show this step, but I know that's when silly mistakes happen. 5 plus 1 is 6. 6 over 6 is 1. 5 minus 1 is 4 over 6 is 2/3. I will not accept 4/6. I will only accept 2/3. Now I got to show you something. I actually wouldn't have done this problem this way if it said solve. If this problem just said solve, I would have tried to factor it. 3x, x. The only way to get 2 is 2 and 1. So 2 and 1, 2 and 3 gives me 5. Set it equal to 0. 2/3, add 2, divided by 3, add 1. There's 2/3 and 1. Hey, what do you know? That's what I got, 2/3 and 1. So obviously you didn't have to use this. You could have factored. So on the quiz, when you have more than one way to do a problem, here's one way. And sorry, not that you can't factor. No, factor it, okay? 2 is the other way you could have done it. Would you want to solve this by completing the square and divide this by 3? Heck no, because 3x squared minus 5x plus 2, I don't want a fraction to begin with, okay? So I wouldn't solve by completing the square. And I can't do the square root thing because I have this. If the problem just said this, I could do the square root thing. All right, let's go to the next one. Play the same game. A equals negative 2, B equals 1, C equals negative 3. Negative 1 plus or minus the square root of 1 squared minus 4 times A times C, all divided by 2 times A. Remember what I like to do? I like to take care of what's most messy first, which is this. So now I have the square root of 1. Don't look at the negatives right now. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 3 is 24. 2 negatives make a positive, but I'm still left with a negative. So I have the square root of negative 23. Now all that gave me this. I can actually simplify that more. I'm going to go I read 23. So why don't I perfectly simplify that? Okay. Then I bring down the negative 1 plus or minus over negative 4. Okay. I don't like a negative in the denominator. So if I change this one to a positive and I change the positive to a negative and the negative to a positive, it's still plus or minus. I read 23 over 4. How many answers do you see here? There are 2 answers. They're both imaginary. So what does that mean? That means that you only had one choice, and that was to do the quadratic formula. If I tried to factor this, First of all, what I don't like about it is there's a negative. So fine, I divide by -1. If I try, oops, that'd be positive. If I tried to factor and get a +3 and have that be negative, there's nothing that works. So I can't factor it. I can't square root it because there's an x. I don't want to complete it by the square because then that's dividing by 2 and that'll give me a fraction. This was my only choice in this one. So obviously this one wouldn't have been an extra credit question or a bonus question. Okay? So now let's go down to these problems. What if you would have gotten this as an answer? Let's assume we did all of this and got this as an answer. Would you be done? Do you think you can divide these two? Well, no, you can't because you couldn't divide it here. So this is the final answer. If you would have had -4 plus or minus 2 rad 23 over 6, you could have divided all of them by 2. That would be -2, 1, and 3. And in that case, your answer would be -2 plus or minus rad 23 over 3. So this is the final answer for this, unless it looked like that. This one, is this the final answer? It isn't, because you can tree it. 8, 6, 4, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2. One set of doubles and another set of doubles means you get 4 rad 3. Now I look. This divides by 2, this divides by 2, and that divides by 2. So -2, 2, 3. So my final answer would be -2 plus or minus 2 rad 3 over 3. And let me tell you right now, if you get an answer like this, you couldn't have factored it. If you get an answer like this, you couldn't have factored it. Anytime you do the quadratic formula and you get a fraction or a whole number, it means you could have factored it. Anytime you have a radical, you couldn't have factored it. So we know that when we square root rad 48, it was 4 rad 3. So my question is, can I divide these two by 3 and divide these two by 2? The answer is no. They either all have to divide by 3 or they all have to divide by 2. And some people say, well, how about this divides by 3? No, this is in the radical. This is not. Okay? So now let's turn the page. And what your homework is going to be is that you're going to take this problem and you're going to solve it using the zero product property, which means factor. You're going to solve this by completing the square, which we learned on Thursday, and you're going to solve this by the quadratic formula. Each time your answers need to be exactly the same. This is what your bonus question will say. And this one, you're going to just solve it any way you want to. So you're going to make decisions. You're going to say, okay, can I factor? If I can factor, what type of factoring is it? Is it the square root? Is it that they have something the same? Is it my guess and check, or is it my hard guess and check? Then I'm going to go, okay, well, if it's not factoring, is it the square root thing? Well, if it's not the square root thing, could I complete the square? Okay, well, I know the last step is any single one will work for the quadratic formula. But I want to talk about the issues about the quadratic formula about this. The problem with the quadratic formula, if you want to use it, let me give you some scenarios. If I had x squared plus 3x equals 2, and you decide to do the quadratic formula, you can only do the quadratic formula when it says equals 0. So you would have to rewrite this to make it equal 0 and get your A, your B, your C. If you decide to do this one using the quadratic formula, let's say you decide to do 3x squared minus 12 equals 0, and you go, okay, I know that it's the square root thing, but I don't want to do that. I want to do the quadratic formula. Then you need to know your A would be 3, your B would be 0 because there's no x, and your C would be -12. Another scenario, if you decided to do -8x squared minus 7x equals 0. Your A is -8 and your B is -7. And your C would be 0. I'm hoping you would see that they both have an x and that's what you would take out. But if you don't see that, you could do each of these by the quadratic formula. But it needs to say equals 0. All right? So let me say again, your homework is make sure these are all the same answer in doing these 6 problems.